I think from the American perspective, our news cycle on, I wouldn't say digital, but at least on TV, it definitely has a very heavy neoliberal slant on audio, radio, and podcasts in general. Much, much more of a neoconservative slant. Although I will say there is a very substantially large libertarian movement in the United States. They are extremely civil liberty driven. They are extremely anti-war driven. And a lot of them are and a lot of them are starting to come around on universal health care. And I do think that that's a very important topic because there are a lot of civil libertarians in the UK, but I'm willing to bet that probably not a single one of them would be willing to give up their universal health care. Can you please talk about that?
Yeah. I mean, this is like one of the things I talk about in my book. So I mentioned that I think that the sort of shock of COVID and Brexit combined will usher in this new wave of this next wave of neoliberalism. And honestly, our universal healthcare is something that is going to be up for grabs. Like there's a lot of us in the UK that are very concerned about this. There's been a number of like attempts to sort of put it into law that post Brexit we wouldn't try and like privatize the NHS, which is our National Health Service. But it's to actually for them to get away with it will be very difficult. But they're doing a damn good job. They're just sort of like slicing off a little tiny bit at a time and doing it by stealth. And all of a sudden one day we're going to turn around to be like, oh, where'd our NHS go? But generally the British public we think that like our universal healthcare is fantastic. And I have to agree. And for me, I don't I can see how I might be able to convince a libertarian that it's a good thing because it provides freedom. If you don't have to worry about like your healthcare costs for anything, you can just go start a business. You can you try anything you want. You can change jobs. You can take some time off and work out what you're going to do next. You can do whatever you want and not have to worry about it. It's like the most freeing thing in the world. And it's I expressed this to a couple of people that I know in Albany while I was staying with them once, and they looked horrified. They were like, "What do you mean? Isn't that communism?" And I was like, no.
Well, and that right there, Josh, is also a testament to our education system.
Oh yeah.
That's a whole other problem. But yeah, I mean, we have a very skewed vision, but we're very spoon-fed particular information. I mean, that's a big part of it. And it starts when we start school and it doesn't ever stop. And now it just feeds itself. But so I just saw somebody post something about, will you put that back up?
Yes.
Because that was interesting. And I want to just see what
from Anna Grace, who I do believe is in the UK.
Here. Do you see that?
Oh yeah, I totally agree. I am not like a huge EU fan. If someone thinks I'm like if someone thinks I'm like super pro EU and they're listening, that's not the case.
So how do you fall on Brexit?
Well, how does that work? And if I could piggyback on that, I think this is a great opportunity for the naivety in the United States for people to understand what actually happened in Greece, because a lot of people really don't know or understand what happened there.
I mean, Greece got really, really screwed over by the EU in terms of like they just came in and they were like, okay, so we're going to give you some money, but then we're going to be in charge of your country, which is a trend that is way more prevalent than people would maybe realize. It's a trend that Naomi Klein actually writes about in The Shock Doctrine fantastically, and she just expresses like the way that the World Bank or the European Central Bank will just go into countries and say, okay, so we're gonna, help you get started. Say, there was like a lot of investment offered to post-Soviet states. And they went, okay, so we're gonna help you, but you're gonna, you're gonna implement these like extreme, like free market, laissez-faire policies, or you're not gonna get the money. And they kind of just bullied Greece into like implementing horrendous levels of austerity. But the EU, as I was saying, is a body that it's a lot of good, but it's got a lot of really bad things about it as well. And it's huge. And the disparity between the countries that are in it is the thing that I've come to see as the biggest issue, because you can't take, in my mind at least anyway, countries like Holland or Germany, with like really affluent, like well-developed nations, and make laws for them that are like encompass almost the entire economy, the entire legal system, and you can't put them in the same framework as somewhere like Bulgaria or Croatia or any of these countries that joined the EU in the last sort of 15 or 20 years, that just they weren't in the same place economically as the rest of the EU. And it's really difficult to legislate across such a huge and disparate area. Like the United States is huge, but like there's a lot more of like a homogenous culture. Like this is 27 countries they're trying to legislate for, and it's really difficult. And the EU is kind of, I've become like really irritated with the EU in the last year, just with the whole COVID thing, because the reason that we ended up having a referendum, basically, I think, or the reason that David Cameron, our prime minister at the time, wasn't able to offer more to the Eurosceptics in his party was because they said that the levels of immigration to Britain were too high, and they wanted to have some control of the border. You can debate as to what you consider too high to be, but there was something like 500,000 to 600,000 people arriving in Britain every year, I think, on average, in those couple of years leading up to the vote, which some people might say is too high. Some people would be like, that's great. We need these immigrants to help grow the economy, to take jobs that people aren't willing to take. Like there's plus and minuses to both of it. But David Cameron went and said, look, can we have like a pause on this, and can we just say, look, we know it's against your like fundamental like principles of the EU, but can we have some control of our border temporarily? And they said, no, that's completely contrary to freedom of movement. And then COVID hits, and all of a sudden the EU's like, oh, well, you could always just close your borders whenever you wanted. It was totally your decision as a sovereign nation. And I was like, you hypocrites. Like, you told us it wasn't possible under any circumstances because it was contrary to your fundamental freedoms. And we voted to leave the EU because you said it wasn't possible, partially. And all of a sudden we discover it is. It's driven me a bit insane. So the EU is a really complex body, and it is run by a lot of people who aren't elected. It's so far from the people who are voting on the European elections. The European election turnout is dismal, and people don't feel connected to it. And the reason that I think that we ended up voting to leave was this idea that we should be totally in charge of what happens in Britain. And I don't think that's an insane idea. I mean, I love a lot of the protections that the EU have put in place for workers, consumers, for the environment. But ultimately, it came down to, like, we wanted to have the final say in how we run our country. And to me, that didn't seem like an insane prospect. I am not sure how I would vote if I went back 5 years with this knowledge, because I voted to remain the first time. And I would maybe do it again because I'm terrified of the sort of fallout from it and the people who are currently in charge. So yeah, it's a tricky one.
So that sounds almost like how I felt when I voted for Joe Biden. Like, it wasn't like it's not necessarily the best choice. It was just a choice. But let me this will put it in perspective for me. So as somebody who's here, like a Bernie Sanders progressive, right? If I lived in the UK when that vote happened, would I have voted for or against?
That is like the $1 million question, really. Like Jeremy Corbyn is quite similar to Bernie Sanders on a lot of policy. And I was big fans of both of them. Actually, more so of Bernie. I feel like he's got more of a spine.
Then that's not good at all for Jeremy Corbyn.
No, I mean, maybe a spine's not the way to put it, but he's just like more forceful. I feel like he talks with more passion. Corbyn's not exactly like a natural leader, I feel, in the way that Bernie is. Like Bernie gets up there and just like, says what he thinks most of the time.
So Jeremy Corbyn was not in favor of Brexit.
So he was even meeker.
No, you see, he was traditionally skeptical of the EU because it was kind of controlling of the ability to do state aid, in other words, to like subsidize like industries in Britain. So the EU doesn't like that at all. And there was a lot of left-wingers in the Labour Party, sort of traditional left-wingers, who were not fans of the European Union. And the Labour Party kind of had this weird split where all of the young people in the party were very pro-Europe, and then there was like a Eurosceptic side that was very sort of trying to, that I think ended up maybe voting for Brexit because they felt helpless, and they felt like it was for me it was almost like a cry for help, like a screw you to the establishment, because like a year before the Brexit vote we had an election, and there was 3 million people that voted in the Brexit vote that did not vote in that election. So that means 3 million people said that they felt that this was an important issue, but the previous election was just not on their radar. So the Jeremy Corbyn campaigned for Remain, but he was accused of doing it half-heartedly, and he basically had to hold the party together for 4 years until he was ousted as leader. Between the young students who had like come to the Labour Party in support of him, but then were aware that he didn't really like Europe, and he was sort of siding with the more traditional part of the party, like the real working class, like trade union side, who were not fans of the EU. And it really like split the party, and it really caused a lot of issues. And this is probably ultimately why he never came to power, was because there was just it was that extra issue that people weren't sure about him. Whereas if the elections that he was involved in could have been based on, you know, spending on infrastructure, making sure our health service is well funded, making sure that, you know, we're moving forward to transition to like a you know, less carbon soaked economy, and you know, clamping down on tax havens and making sure the wealthy don't, you know, hide all their money offshore, and, you know, trying to challenge the establishment. If that had been the sole focus of the campaign, I feel he would have won. And in 2017, when he came this close, the election was less about Brexit. When he then got you know, trounced by Boris Johnson in 2019, it was far more about Brexit. Like Boris Johnson's whole thing, his slogan was "Get Brexit Done," which is, you know, a fantastic piece of, you know, articulate political messaging. But it really worked, and that's where he lost it, I think, was Europe actually caused him to not come to power in my mind, at least anyway.
Okay, so I've concluded that if I were living in the UK, I would be with Labour and I would support Brexit, but I would be very anti-nationalistic and anti-xenophobic and want to not have those things be. That's where I would be. Okay, so I'm good. I understand now. I understand. No, that's what I didn't understand. Where would I be? Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.